This is the UX Institute podcast, and I'm Mark Swain, founder of UXI. In this podcast, I interview UX and product leaders from around the globe.
The billion-dollar one-person company, it's marketing hype. These products are great for when you have an idea, you want to put it in market, but as soon as you start to see traction, you instantly have to be thinking about a potential full build. When great design is paired with great technology, amazing things happen.
In this episode, Barry O'Reilly, author of Lean Enterprise and Unlearn and co-founder at NobodyStudios, talks through his very non-linear path, from engineer to product leader to venture studio founder. He unpacks why NobodyStudios is deliberately not chasing unicorns, why they love boring AI businesses, and how they design companies to be built cheaply and sold early. We cover the reality of AI product building beyond the hype, the flaws of one-person billion-dollar companies, the dangers of chasing enterprise sales too early, and why UX and product design on top of AI will likely become the biggest differentiator of all. Enjoy the chat. Hi, Barry. Welcome to the UXI podcast. We're going to have an interesting chat in the AI space. Before we kick in, I thought it'd be good if you could give a little bit of background to your career, where you've come from, talk about maybe some of your books, maybe what has brought you to this point to the investment space, particularly in AI.
My background is, I'm probably a little bit it's not an obvious path about how I got where I am today. I actually trained as an engineer. I did a business and engineering course in what was DIT or TU Dublin. I actually thought I was going to do a business degree. And then on the second lecture, the lecturer walks in and starts putting Java code up on the screen. And then half the people in the room put their hands up and said, I think I'm in the wrong class. I'm meant to be doing business information systems and management. And the lecturer was like, no, you're in the right class. You're going to be doing computer programming for 4 years. And half the room sort of gasped and was like, oh, they weren't expecting it. But it turned out that I enjoyed it. Yeah, that's really where I started to get more into really the technical side, I guess, of what was computing at the time. I was always interested in businesses. I loved the idea of owning a business potentially someday or running a business someday. The technology side really sort of was something I wanted to get exposure to because I just saw that the world was moving into a more tech-driven space. And then really everything I did after that was just trying to gain experiences in either learning how to build interesting products, but generally focused around problems that I thought were kind of fun. The first sort of real taste I had of sort of that world was in Ireland. You can do this sort of working visa where you go to America called a J1 visa. I was able to go and do that in San Francisco when my first ever job was in a company called Citysearch.com. What Citysearch did was it was around just the beginning of the internet, the sort of 2000s. You would pay us $50 a month and we would go around to like Mark's Cafe and take photos of your cafe and ask you what was on the menu. And we'd sort of write it up and give you this sort of web page. We were really disrupting the yellow pages actually at the time. Our number one competitor was Zip2, which was the Musk brothers' first ever company. We were going to merge with them at one point, but they went on to sell that company to fund Building X, which became PayPal. And then we sold out Ticketmaster. It just really gave me this sort of amazing experience of I could just write HTML code. It just gave me this real taste for what it's like to be involved when a technology wave is happening, where people are figuring out, how to use the technology sometimes even to make it useful in a business context. The other thing that was really fantastic was it didn't matter that I was still in university. I could provide to the team, if you will. And that's all that mattered, and we just got to work building stuff. And it's funny, in a little bit of a full circle, today I run a venture studio called NobodyStudios, and we're trying to build 100 AI companies over the next 5 years. But Citysearch was actually one of the first companies incubated by the very first venture studio, Idea Lab, based in Pasadena, which, funnily enough, I only really learned later in life. So it's kind of funny that, here I am 20 odd years later, and I'm back doing the same thing that I was doing 20 years ago. But this time, hopefully I'm helped shaping the direction more than just being the contributor, which again was still super fun.
Amazing. of course, on your journey, you've written a few books and now you're in the investment space, jumping into AI startups. Maybe we could just kick into a little bit about that in terms of what brought you to set up NobodyStudios, focusing on AI startups particularly. Why the move? Why there now? What are you seeing or feeling? What's bringing you in there?
As you said, around 2010, I was working in London with a company called ThoughtWorks. And they were one of these early pioneers of agile software development at the time. There was great people working there. On my very first day, I sat down beside a guy called Jim Weber, who was this pioneer in how to write APIs and graph databases. And the other person sitting across from me from the table was a guy called Jez Humble. And Jez wrote this book with David Farley called Continuous Delivery, which again was this idea of doing thousands of deployments a day or working in smaller batches. And all these people were just amazing to me at the time. They were sort of one of the reasons I wanted to work in the company. And it was a great experience. But I was one of the first people who sort of joined the company that necessarily wasn't an engineer. I'd moved away from coding and been much more in this, what wasn't really called it yet, but product management was where I was still called a project manager working in ThoughtWorks because we didn't have a word for somebody that would help shape, if you will, like what we were going to build and why. But anyway, I had a great 5 years there. But oddly, Jez, who was sitting across from me on the first day, I started blogging and he became very familiar with what I was doing. He ended up asking me to co-author his next book with him called Lean Enterprise, which was part of Eric Ries's Lean Startup series. And that book went gangbusters. And I moved to America, started up my own sort of advisory business. And while I was there, it was a great experience. I was working with amazing companies, Fortune 500 exec teams, startups in San Francisco. And, I learned a lot of lessons and I saw a lot of patterns about what was happening again and again, both either building products in big companies or when people were trying to identify early products in growing companies. I just sort of had the sense where the model potentially of creating a place where you could, rather than sort of do all like advisor roles and have this sort of scattergun portfolio, could you create a place where you could have much more agency and effect on the portfolio and help identify the ideas, get them off the ground, get them moving, hire in teams to start scaling those businesses and sell them. And this was something that was always permeating in my mind. And then one of the companies that I was on the advisory board for was called Agile Craft, a Jira sort of competitor. That ended up getting acquired by Atlassian. And one of the other people who was on the board with me was a guy called Lee Tagali. And he built the iStore for Apple. And he put me in touch with who now became my co-founder of NobodyStudios, Mark McNally, who was based in Los Angeles. And Mark had sort of been involved in startups for, since he could remember really. And he explained this idea of a venture studio to me, which was really, a name on this sort of idea that it was in the back of my mind of having a coordinated portfolio where you get a lot of experienced entrepreneurs together to put their energy into that portfolio and grow it and have ownership of it and shape it a lot more. And that's really what became NobodyStudios today, just on the cusp now of doing our Series A round. It's been a great journey, lots of mistakes and, lots of things I'm willing to share with people, listening to the show about how we've gone about it and what we've learned.
Amazing. And so the focus of the fund and the studio right now is specifically AI products. Are there specific areas, categories that you're looking to invest in more so than others, or is it just a open playground to see what's working at speed?
The answer is it's probably a little bit of both. We do have general domains that we're interested in. They're often around health and wellness, e-commerce. We really like edtech or anything where people are taught as they learn the product. That really comes from the backgrounds of a lot of the people that are involved and our investors who've been part of it, because we try to create unfair advantages. So, some of our investors are, for instance, executives in big airlines in the US. So they know the problems that exist in the airline and bring us these problems that we can say, right, maybe that's something that we could create a product around and then they can help us find pilots and grow it. So we try to create these unfair advantages. But the other thing we look for really boring business problems. We're not trying to reinvent this sort of whole new world. We actually look for business models or products or businesses that sort of are working, but yet if you applied these sort of exponential technologies to those businesses, they could really sort of take off. So one example that's sort of top of mind at the moment is a business called Evalify, and that's in the legal tech space. And what you do with Evalify is you essentially upload a pitch deck or a business ideation document, and it will run an intellectual property rights check against that idea across 200 million patents in 170 jurisdictions. And it will do it for like $250 and give you sort of like a credit score, or if you will, an IP score to say if you're infringing or not. That's sort of an example where if you gave that to a lawyer, it would take them, months, tens of thousands of dollars, and they can really only look at a small domain of ideas for a lot of money. And we've used the technologies to do it cheaper, faster, and at greater volume. So for us, that's the way we tend to think about these businesses, and then you apply the technology to them.
Yeah. So going after boring businesses, are you finding possibly that there's more value or longevity in utility-based startups that are more practical workflows rather than jumping on the hype of quick builds, quick builders for products like the suite of stuff we see at the moment from Replit to Lovable, buildanything.com, everything else?
Yeah, so what we've learned is that those products are great for prototyping, but they are not good for productionizing anything.
Okay.
So a lot of these sort of, the $1 billion one-person company, it's marketing hype. These products are great for if we have ideas and we use them to prototype heavily and test for like our first sort of 50 to 100 customers. But once you start getting to anything of any magnitude or scale that requires security or auditability, the platforms, not only can they not cope, they become extremely expensive. Lovable is designed for you to burn up your usage tokens by every time you do an iteration or a rebuild, it burns up all the tokens. So you have to pay more, right? Like this is how the products are built.
Yep.
Coming from an engineering background where I learned a lot about good engineering discipline, these products are great for when you have an idea, you want to put it in market, test the niche, see if you can get some traction. But as soon as you start to see traction, you instantly have to be either thinking about a roadmap to a potential full build on a different platform, because their scalability and robustness is just not there to have tens of thousands of customers transacting, at a scalable, repeatable manner. Now, that can be controversial for a lot of the sort of folks out there, but believe us, we've been working on this technology for a number of years now, and we've sort of had our fingers burnt either trying to build these sort of massive platforms. And remember, there can only be 2 or 3 of them because they're the only ones that suck up all the venture money, right? Like Lovables just sucks up these tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. So there can only be 2 or 3 platforms that really sort of win, if that makes sense. Our model for all of this, our building, is actually to build companies cheap and to sell them at sort of early to mid stage. And this is, again, one of the differences probably about what we look for. 80% of M&A happens under $300 million. So as soon as your company starts to get up to a valuation around $200 million, your chances of an exit just go through the floor. One of the things we're seeing more and more is these, like someone sent me a chance to invest in Anthropic on a secondary market, and they're like, worth on the way to like 4 billion, and they could be worth 11 billion. And you're sort of sitting there going like, this just doesn't make sense. For me, I come from that sort of school of thought where if you build good, robust businesses and you can build them cheaply, you want to sell them early to get your exits.
Yeah.
That's ultimately the business model of our studio too, as well, is we're not trying to create unicorns. We're trying to create good businesses that we can sell early and get an exit and then use that money to keep rebuilding more companies.
Yeah. Excellent. And that mandate of kind of sitting in that bracket of company size to acquisition point, is that generally understood by your investors? And are they looking for unicorns? Are they looking for the studio to push harder, go bigger? Or is it clearly understood that this is the level we're going to?
It's definitely one of our sort of strategic points, if you want to say that, at a
Yeah.
company. The other thing is, like, most of these investors, they've invested into VC funds and they haven't seen any returns, right? Like, most funds have not returned anything in the last decade.
Yeah.
Because they're playing that sort of unicorn game. And in many ways, there's sort of a frustration, if you will, that getting to liquidity with any of these investments it's just not happening. Everything's a paper, at the beginning of these funds, it's a paper valuation of your portfolio has gone up 5x, 10x, and then all these write-downs have been happening. So it's just a paper game. People aren't seeing liquidity from those investments. So when we're talking about a model where you're doing sort of regular distributions that are focused around trying to have high velocity, so build lots of companies and then sell them early. So they're getting these ongoing distributions by holding equity in our studio. And again, that just comes from a lot of us being part of the venture system and realizing that, look, it's an amazing system, but the model that I think is appealing to me, at least anyway, is have an entity that is regularly paying out distributions for building and selling companies rather than an entity that's going for moonshots. And, if it pays out, well, lucky you. If it doesn't, well, unlucky you. And that sort of is just, a different approach that I believe that meets more of where we're at with these technology innovation cycles and how quickly businesses grow and collapse, and how long and how hard it is to actually build one of these 10 to 14 year type companies to build a unicorn. And again, that's a long time to wait for a potential exit event.
Absolutely. No, all really good points. It is a massive risk factor in venture capital investing. Shifting gears a little then, what are you feeling right now in terms of the AI space, where we're at, the speed we're all moving at, the cycle that we're in? What are you feeling is kind of bubbling up through the noise? Or has anything surfaced yet as good utility category-wise, like customer experience, agentic workflows? What's going to stick around, do you think, in terms of the crazy speed that we're all feeling at the moment in terms of build, find something that sticks? If you can imagine 2 to 3 years out, what's left out of the rubble?
So for me personally, this sort of plays out at a couple of different levels. The first one is just me and AI. So one of the things that's a huge part of both my own productivity and actually how we built out our studio is leveraging these tools to make either people, individuals, or the business more effective. And for me, that's a simple example. Like, over the last number of months, I've actually been doing a lot of talks and coaching around this, is how I've set up my own AI stack, like a suite of tools that helps me be the most effective that I can be on a daily basis. And the way I started is I always have a meeting co-pilot in every meeting that I'm in. The tool I use is actually Otter. Shout out to those lads. That for me was one of this idea of having constantly generating information in meetings and ways to capture it. And in essence, put it into a database to turn it into an asset.
Yeah.
So really for me, at the end of every week, I basically run scripts that sort of go through every meeting that I was in, synthesize the key topics that I was covering, any blind spots I might have had, the actions, the owners, who's responsible, have they been assigned to people in whatever task management system that we're using? Is there any additional notes I want to add to any of those actions? And it gives me this sense of like tempo and auditability. Plus, all those things are massive time sinks normally. But for me, they're sort of automated away, right? So I found the traits that I have, which are generating a lot of information by talking in meetings.
Yeah.
I look for the tasks that then I have to do, and then I find tools that help me, if you will, automate all of that. I spend more time on creativity and problem solving and less time on time sinking tasks that are important, but they can take up 80% of your day. And then we have done the same thing to our studio. So we've, as much as possible, looked to automate functions, because it's sort of a promise of people joining our studio. Everything from onboarding to fundraising outreaches to go-to-market strategies is we've built these routines that we know the startups need to do. So it helps the founders then plug in their own, if you will, customizations that matter to them. And then they can automate the workflows to help them. A lot of the tools are still early, right? They don't work well together.
Yeah.
There's still aspects of orchestration that you need. For instance, in ChatGPT, the agent kit just came out on Monday. I haven't even had a chance to play with it yet.
Yeah, likewise.
Because I had been stitching things with Zapier together or using make.com, right? So the thing that is interesting is like, it's never going to be as bad as it is now, which is kind of a weird thing to say with some of these tools.
Yeah, sure.
But it sort of is the answer there. That is really what's been probably the most fascinating parts for me so far, is just this element of personal productivity and leverage internally, and just greater auditability and tracking and tempo inside the company. And that sort of leads us again to the point I was saying about externally. What we're tending to look for is these, if you will, boring businesses that are just, they're business models that we know have real traction. There's customers that can be served, but they are under leveraged in terms of all their tracking abilities, or the way they sort of manage their businesses, or the learning mechanisms that could be in place in their businesses are all still very manual. And they're missing out on, if you will, like the automation that could be offered. So for us, again, that's a sort of huge opportunity. And then another simple example, one of the businesses we've been working with, they're a healthcare provider.
Right.
And they've created this marketplace where on one side, they have all these high net worth individuals who want and are able to sort of hire high quality physicians to come and visit them at their house. They want personal care at home. And then on the other side of their marketplace, they've got all these doctors who don't want to have practices and are happy to wait around for a call to come to someone's house and do whatever it is, a dental surgery or a non-acute procedure, but they can charge top dollar for it. So they've created this sort of marketplace or concierge experience, but they have no technology in their business. It's all a person who has a phone and a Rolodex on one side and a Rolodex on another. And it's just a great example where we know that business works. And really, if you start to think about how you could create a very simple platform experience that would be able to learn much more about the individual patients and learn more and recruit and socialize the medical teams that are available, it takes workload off the people trying to do the matching. And then the platform is learning all the time about what people look for, certain types of experiences and where they travel and who are the best people and records of what's happened. And right, all this good stuff that is more and more becoming what I would say routine for these technologies. So that tends to be our focus rather than trying to create or build a new AI type platform, because we tried to do that before early in the studio, and we learned that you need millions of dollars and you're competing with basically all the companies that have this massive venture backing funding, and there's only going to be one or two winners. And that's not the game for us to play.
Visit uxinstitute.com to sign up to our new newsletter. UXI will be sharing best-in-class UX research practices as well as in-depth interview content so you can excel at your career in UX. An interesting point you did raise there too was that approach, just the medical workflow you spoke of there, marketplace for dentists, physicians, whatever, that's also enabling more doctors, just as an example, to become more entrepreneurial themselves, right? Which is where I think AI might be shifting a lot of people fast. And I think given the impact AI is going to have on so many different sets of wages in different verticals over the next 5 years, I think it is going to push people to be more entrepreneurial.
Yeah, so I'll give you another example. Last week I was in London and I had dinner with a friend of mine. He's an ankle surgeon. He's someone who's well known in his field.
Yeah.
He was explaining to me that his job, a lot of the time when he's running his private practice, is he's sitting in his practice waiting for referrals to come. Because he's not a GP, right? So his sort of, if you will, business development network is trading on his brand to your point about being entrepreneurial
Yeah.
and trading on his network referrals.
Yeah.
The way he gets inbound customers is all comes through either GPs that are aware of his work or he gets referrals. So this idea, even as I was explaining to him about this idea of a concierge mapping service, to him, his instant reply was, I want to be on that platform because it gives him exposure to new leads. Otherwise, he's just sitting in his, very nice consulting sort of rooms, paying money to rent those rooms, waiting for his diary to fill up or the phone to ring.
Yeah.
Everyone has this type of experience. To your point as well, this notion of us being uniquely talented or skilled in specific areas and being able to be hired for these micro assignments or whatever they might be, that is a trend. It's a pattern. And whether you're a doctor, whether you're, product management or leader, like that pattern will play out again and again and again. And if you can create these systems, and this is why we really like sort of health and wellness, e-commerce, and these sort of edtech plays, because edtech, again, is this idea really for us about situations where you're going to have to learn new skills in context. The classic examples of businesses we've been doing is a lot in the engineering space, where you have a small number of highly trained individuals that know how to operate certain machines globally, right? So some of these mining machines, as an example, like there might be 10 master engineers who know how to fix them globally, and they're constantly on planes flying to different parts of the world to maintain and look after these pieces of equipment that are worth a fortune for these raw materials manufacturers. So what if you could start to augment those folks where they weren't always on planes and getting tired, but they could be on a call like this in virtual environments, training more operators to do routine maintenance, or being on call and being a real-time provider of context to people who they're trying to service or fix these very complex machines. Same thing with doctors performing surgeries. Anything where you're doing a new, maybe complex task that you want information, support, real-time insight and analytics based on a problem that's emerging in front of you. That's a software engineer trying to write code. That's a business person trying to figure out a strategy to grow their company. It's an education stream that people are looking for. So again, those businesses are also really interesting to us because it's leveraging data and using context and then serving it in a timely manner. And that's never going to go away. The question is how quick can you do it? How deep can the data be? How real can the context be? As you can improve the accuracy of all those things, people are getting better experiences. For us, that's the kind of thing we're always looking for.
Yeah, excellent. And then in terms of the studio, when you're receiving pitch decks, which I'm sure you're receiving stuff weekly and getting introductions for all kinds of new AI platforms, what are you seeing coming across your desk that startups are missing, not understanding about AI?
I wrote a blog about this, and I think because it's October and it's around Halloween, I was trying to be funny. When AI projects are zombies, ghosts, or ghouls, and how to spot them, right? And because there are so many of these zombie projects out there, I still remember another one of these technology waves in 2018. I went to my first ever blockchain conference in San Francisco. It's called Token Fest. Every stall that I went to in there, everyone was like, oh, we're the Airbnb of blockchain. And I was sort of like, well, why? Because people need to own their own data when they travel. And I'm like, okay. So you think people will leave Airbnb and join you because they want their information on a blockchain?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah. And
Jesus.
I still feel a little bit that we have a bit of this situation. Plus, there's also pressure on founders. I was just looking this stat up. In Q1 2025, 71% of VC deals on PitchBook, they said, went to AI-based companies. Instantly, if you're trying to even attract funding, you sort of have to have this AI story to a certain extent. And so then you have people trying to shoehorn that in to everything.
Yeah.
And again, it creates certain types of behaviors, right? So it's not like these people are bad actors. They're competing for a limited set of resources. And if they don't have something that aligns to what's interesting or attractive to the investment group, you're just going to struggle, right? It's just sort of that the stats will tell you that.
Yeah.
A couple of heuristics that are really important for us. A sign where a lot of the traction is just talk. So maybe there's like a white paper that they've found or research partners. If they don't have sort of early paying repeatable customers, that's sort of a bit of a flag for us. The other one is that there's no learning loop built in. So it's not some sort of product that gets better the more you use it. It just automates rules. Like there's a lot of these sort of rules engines we've seen, vanity metrics. Like, my gosh, I know I love a good vanity metric. Don't get me wrong. We get things like 10,000 API calls a day from people, and it's stuff that's not about retention or customer acquisition costs or gross margins. Like nothing that sort of shows the trajectory that the product is getting better as more people are using it, and that as customers start to use it, that they can see that ultimately the acquisition of those customers, they're going to retain them, or it's going to cost less to do it. And then I mentioned this idea of technology costs that don't scale. So a lot of the people will provide prototype that they've built, maybe in Lovable, that instantly, if this goes right, what's your answer? And they're like, oh, I'll just still be on Lovable. And then, that that's just a path to sort of disaster. And then any sort of hidden data sets. So when people sort of come up with like, well, we've proprietary data sets with no provenance, like that's another thing that's a bit of a worry for us too, as well. It's like, where are they getting the quality and the integrity of their data, regardless of the models that they might try to build?
Absolutely.
I know none of these things are that exciting because you've probably heard 100 people say them before. But again, I think we just come from this slant of, building businesses for the last 10 years or so. The first principles always still apply. It's like, can you get customers that pay for the product? Does it get cheaper to attract and retain those customers? Does the technology scale as you add more customers? How are you managing your data? Is there something unique that you're learning that no one else can copy as a competitive advantage from that data? Does the product get better because how people use it? They're the same questions probably I was asked 15 years ago, and now I'm asking other people. And that's sort of what's helping us, both with the companies we're trying to build ourselves and, when we meet or try to help other entrepreneurs on their journey. That's sort of the approach that we've taken. We're not trying to build unicorn type companies because we don't have infinite resources where we can raise loads of capital to build the models, to market them to the masses.
In terms of the startups that are coming into your studio pitching, what's your take on their understanding of enterprise AI-wise in terms of implementing enterprise adoption, speed, pain, lack of data, messy data, and the trail of pain goes on and on there? I know on my side, I'm seeing it a lot where there's a lot of pitches coming in. There's a lot of people I'm speaking to. They're looking for mid-tier to large enterprises in terms of adoption for their internal teams and orgs. In your head, you're like, this is not going to happen. In terms of speed, in terms of incumbents, in terms of getting the first 2 to 3 customers in the platform enterprise-wise could take, 6-10 months to get a check-in until they're actually committed, and then you realize their data's on the floor. You can't get started in the right way, and whatever other hindering factors will most definitely arise out of that experience or process. Does it mean that AI founders definitely need to move towards a self-serve, quick, speedy implementation?
It's a great question, right? Because again, that's part of our heuristic, if you will. We look for businesses that we can build cheap, stand up quickly, don't have multi-year prototype rounds of investment, that don't have enterprise sales, that we could get profitable by a Series A, right? So that's sort of, if you will, like our sweet spot that we're aiming for, which is, in my opinion, a good way for most businesses to start. Because the challenge, again, as you're describing, as I was just laughing listening to you, it is the reality for these enterprise type products is that the sales cycles are so long, they're so costly, and they're high risk. So if you can crack that market, like power to you, it's a hard path. versus can you find these niches? And this has been massive for us. You almost have to niche down so much that you just have this one great feature that will pay for all the other features eventually.
Yeah.
But you have to do one thing really well in a very tight market. This throws back to the lean startup days where it just reminds me of thinking big, starting small, slicing your product down, because that's how you get traction. You find 100 customers that love your product.
Yeah.
And sure enough, 1,000 people will want it after that. But you've got to start super small. And for us, again, it's just the philosophy we try to bake in for how we're working. And I think especially it's the earliest days of this, as you've been sharing already, there's so much to still figure out. The products and platforms are still, again, great, but they're probably a glimpse of what they'll be in 5 years' time.
Absolutely.
And I think you have to just recognize that we're still at the bottom of this exponential curve and there's still a lot to figure out. But the principles of building robust, good businesses are never matter more, I think, at this stage of where we are on the curve.
Yeah, it's good to align with you on that. It's where my thinking's at more and more. When I see more startups coming in, looking at more decks, it's all enterprise one-offs. And you're just like, this just is not going to fly anymore. Waiting for a check of $1 million or 800K that will arrive a year later once the enterprise piece is done as they're burning through cash. I just see so much of this. And now obviously we're in the AI phase and it's just not going to fly anymore.
It's just hard, right? Like the thing people get excited about is seeing traction with real paying customers. If you are going down the path, if you will, of trying to build these big platforms that are multi-year bets, there's a small number of companies that will win in that space. So if you're trying to build an enterprise grade product, firstly, you're up against, let's just take HR. You're up against Workday, who have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend, can buy their way or acquire their way out of any problem.
Yeah.
You're starting from scratch. And that is sort of the war, plus whatever, hyper mega fund VC backed startup there is that's probably in the west coast of the US that's going after the same problem with 1,000 times the resources you have. From a probabilistic point of view, it's a tough path. It's not impossible, but it's very tough. I think it's just helping people figure out choosing the game that they're playing and being aware of that is sort of, I think, a really important part as you're describing.
Yeah. A couple of last questions around this is that, do you sit and think sometimes about 5 years' time and what the startup landscape looks like, what product teams look like, what engineering teams look like? You'll read a lot of Doomsday's articles weekly.
I do.
I do too, yeah.
Well, I can give a very practical, real example. When we started the studio, like our first year was just kicking around in a garage. There was a couple of us. It wasn't really a real business. But even then, we still had notions that we would have a team of probably about sort of, one product leader, 4 or 5 engineers, testers. The startup team that we were designing our model around still sort of ranged between sort of 6 to maybe 10 people, with sales person in there. Today, the way I think about it is if you have good routines around how to do your initial go-to-market, your outreach, your automation of your back office, you have a good engineering team, suddenly you're down to like maybe 4 to 6 people and you've got a really robust company that could get to certainly seed, if not Series A type position. And again, that's exciting because it's less expensive to have a team that big, which means you can make a few more mistakes and iterate or pivot into the right answer. So the runways are more extended for the same amount of resources, but it's less people leveraging technology more. So again, that's fascinating to me. So the way we're thinking more in the studio now is in 5 years' time, we should be even, 10 times more automated and augmented in our working ways.
Of course, yeah.
Which, again, it doesn't mean that the people go away. It means the people are working on more important creative problems rather than time-sucking things. So I think that's a really important part of this is it's not like we're automating people out of it. We're actually giving people more creative problem solving time back.
Yeah, yeah.
You're still going to need, someone to drive the car, someone to break into the safe, someone to grab the money and run. Like you need a heist team, but they're just going to have better tooling and support around them, And so that's how we're modeling the future for us. Is it's greater automation, greater augmentation for teams. They can ultimately use less resources, financially especially, to go after similar problems and mean that they're a better investment. We have this idea, we call it progressive, being frugal and aggressive. And that's sort of how we go about it.
Okay, nice. A final question. In terms of the runway ahead, if we kind of park startups and think about general users on the front end, right? We're all sitting behind GPT window and Claude and whatever else daily, right? More and more users and daily people are getting used to the single UI, the single interface to perform work, tasks, whatever it might be. How important do you feel design user experience is going to become on top of AI in the next 5-7 years? I'm finding that a lot of the AI interface and workflow is
laughable.
Yeah, it's quite distasteful. There's no real experience there. I have this kind of notion in my head that, in fact, UX and the UI layer on top of the wrapper is going to become the most important differentiator long term for adoption on the front end.
I couldn't agree more, right? Like you have to remember also OpenAI, they were just geeky engineers trying to build the fastest queries they could possibly build. Like no one actually really knew what the utility of their product was. They just got excited because they were the fastest model that did the best things. And then, so as you say, they put a really horrible UX wrapper on it, call it ChatGPT, and then suddenly the world explodes, right?
Yeah, right.
And even the experience, like I'm sitting here with you on one screen and I have OpenAI and ChatGPT on the other. And like, it's the most horrible experience. The app versus the web. You can only do certain things on the web. You can't do them on the app. It is horrific. That's why I always say, Lovable's like can't productionize and UX is laughable with these tools. Like it's terrible. But I think we've always learned that in startups is that when great design is paired with great technology, amazing things happen. I just think the engineers are still running the show at the moment. And rightly so, they're building some amazing things. It's funny, it takes me back to my first day in ThoughtWorks. I remember when I joined, that table was just all engineers. And they said to me, what do you do? I'm like, I don't write code. And they're like, why are you on the project? You're not adding any value, And it's just, that's sort of sometimes the mentality of how these things go. And so again, I'm excited to see how this stuff emerges because I think we are seeing the beginnings of a much more graphical drag and drop mind mapping experience about even building workflows. And to me, that's sort of the beginning of what great design, especially user experience design, starts to move toward. And that's exciting for me.
Yeah. There's a lot of pressure on designers now, as their role evolves over the coming years, spending hopefully much, much less time in Figma. In fact, staying away from Figma entirely maybe would be a good thing for everyone. Working at a more high level, using some tools very quickly to get prototypes out, leveraging design systems off the shelf to plug and play to guide engineers in a much faster way, right? I think all that's going to evolve. And to your point earlier, it really supports the designer or product manager combined, spending a lot more time on creative, strategic direction and solving product problems in a much bigger way, which they wouldn't have that kind of time for. Instead, they're slaving over mobile screens and Figma, moving fucking pixels around. Like, hopefully those days are gone. They can get much more strategic into work. And from a technical perspective, spending a lot of more time in LLMs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right on. And I love a little bit of your past trauma coming out there as well.
Yeah. It's lots of trauma. So I've a lot to get through.
Yeah, good for you. Let it out. Oh, good.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, look, I really enjoyed the chat. I could stay chatting easily for another few hours. Maybe we'll come back on and do another session on another area.
It would be a pleasure.
Thank you for your time. For anyone listening, I will leave in the show notes links to Barry's books, his new book, Unlearn, along with his blog and other details to follow Barry.
Thanks very much.
If you've learned anything from this episode, I ask one small favor. Please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or share this episode across your networks. Both really help the growth of the podcast and will allow me to continue to secure amazing guests that will part their insight with you. Thanks for listening to the official UX Institute podcast, and talk to you next time.